In general, I don't like making negative videos. It's just not as fun for me, or presumably you. And when it comes to the Buffyverse, having a hot take is just an occupational hazard of having any opinion at all. So, I won't lie, this is a universe that is occasionally intimidating for me to write about, because even though I can ignore them, it's not fun to get angry, impassioned paragraphs from strangers on the internet. But the reason I'm making this video isn't to stir anything up or ruffle any feathers, just to share my thoughts as they bubble up now and then. And recently they've been bubbling. So I figured I would capitalize on this and capture them as clearly and definitively as I can, in hopes that at least one other person will resonate and come across as one of many reasonable interpretations. With all that said, I have a tough relationship with Wesley Wyndham Price, even though he often makes the top rankings of Buffyverse characters. And I'm not clueless, I do get why. He starts out this lovingly goofy guy with baggage that slowly and surely rears its head until he becomes almost unrecognizable from Buffy Season 3 compared to Angel Season 5. However, as the show goes on, I find it harder to enjoy and invest in Wesley's arcs. Like I said, I don't like making negative videos, and that's not even the intent here either. More so, it's just to be honestly and lovingly critical of the stories I enjoy. So, why do I struggle with Wes? Largely because of the writing in two of his major storylines. First, there is that piece that everybody really loves. His dark arc, the very thing that often garners him a bunch of praise and wins in character polls.
I'll take away your bucket.
Yes, Wesley starts out a bumbling loser on Buffy and becomes a brooding, confident, morally gray man on Angel. And on paper, this looks like it would be my very favorite thing in the world. But firstly, this isn't as impressive for me from a writing standpoint compared to other characters who drastically change, simply because, like the other characters that made the Buffy-Angel transition, Wes starts out less as a character and more as a caricature, which isn't a bad thing. It just means that, of course, he's going to be noticeably different and distinct on a show that takes him seriously, rather than the one in which he's largely cheap comedy or comparison fodder for Giles. More importantly, there's the content of the dark turn itself. Wes's dark side has always been there and comes out now and then, but the catalyst for his big, huge transformation is when he works with Holtz behind the team's back, beats up Lorne, and takes Connor. It's not Wesley's fault that Connor gets taken to a hell dimension, but his actions are what makes it possible. After finding out what Wesley did, Angel goes after him in a murderous rage, and he is no longer part of the team. From there, we get this Wes.
What happened to you, man?
I had my throat cut and all my friends abandoned me.
I think this is supposed to be an moment, but this is the face it usually generates for me. Because yes, your friends abandoned you. And why was that? Just out of nowhere? Your friends just suck and up and left you one day? Or was there a catalyst?
I had my throat cut and all my friends abandoned me.
This just comes across as such righteous self-pity without addressing the elephant in the room that he abandoned his friends first.
I had my throat cut and all my friends abandoned me.
Every time I watch this arc, I am screaming at the screen. He refused to include them in his decisions. He beat up Lorne. He took his best friend's child without consulting anyone else. The decision itself isn't the issue for me. It's plenty intriguing to have a protagonist make a poor judgment call with good intentions and then not be able to own up to the consequences. That's fine. Because we understand why Wes did it, right? He truly believed the prophecy that would put Connor in danger. The issue, my issue, is how the text frames all of this.
I'll help because it's Fred. But don't come here again.
By giving him these lines, having him show basically no remorse, and then reintegrating him into the team in Season 5, the text endorses this one-sided victimhood. Wes's attitude throughout this season reminds me of Willow.
We need to get you a nice companion rat that you can love, play with, and grow attached to until one day they leave you for no good reason.
In this scene, Willow is clearly unable to acknowledge her wrongdoing, and we're clearly meant to see this as irresponsible self-pity, right? She's deflecting to make herself feel better. The difference is, in this story, Wes gets portrayed with a righteousness that strips this very nuanced story of nuance. Like, yes, Wes/Willow betrayed trust in those close to them, and those people reacted realistically to that betrayal.
I know you feel betrayed.
Yes, well, that's one of the unpleasant side effects of betrayal.
And I get what they're going for. Wes, a good man, finds himself in an impossible position, makes a difficult choice, and mistakenly thinks he knows best. And in doing so, he hurts people he cares about. And I know this because they've done it before. Because Angel had a very similar arc in season 2. While that arc isn't perfect, and I do wish we'd spent more time with Angel in the team doghouse, at no point did I doubt that Angel wanted to make things right.
How do we know we can trust you?
I guess I'll just have to earn that.
And this is the big key difference. Because the way Wes's storyline goes, I can never tell if he feels any guilt at all.
Wouldn't think kidnapping his son would have such a negative effect on our friendship.
Then there's kidnapping the fruit of my loins. Smooth.
He survived.
And this is the writing. And Wes's lack of remorse is even more off-putting in context of his lecturing Gunn about trust and loyalty earlier that same season.
If you ever withhold information or attempt to subvert me again, I will fire you. I can't have any one member of this team compromising the safety of the group, no matter who it is.
And you know what? Maybe that's the point. Maybe the hypocrisy is the point. Maybe Wes never apologizing is the point. But if so, A, I'm not having a fun time watching, and B, I'm not going to feel sympathetic towards Wes in the way that the text seems to want me to. Because that's the thing. I want to understand. I want to hear Wes reflect or discuss anything at all with any member of the team. The most introspection we get is in a jokey scene with Willow.
I've seen a darkness in myself. I had a woman chained in a closet.
Oh, well, hey.
No, it doesn't compare.
No, dark. That's dark. You've been to a place.
Obviously, there's interesting stuff to be said here about Wes coping with his failure, given the insecurities and high standards set by his father, but it all kind of gets lost. Wes's relationship with his father ends up feeling more like rationale in the background rather than something that's properly unpacked. Compare this to Angel or Willow or Faith's arc. After making poor choices, each of them actually grapples with who they are and what they've done and what it means. Even when these characters are behaving unlikably, their dark paths are compelling because they eventually lead to a breakthrough and character growth from it. Angel Season 2 arc is interesting because he initially doubles down on his pride and his arrogance, and then the narrative forces him to address those beliefs and those patterns and build from there. Willow is forced to confront her own pride, her need to be needed, her need for control, and develops into a new understanding of herself. I don't need Wes punching Angel's chest in the pouring rain, sobbing. But if this is someone that they want me to empathize with, and again, eventually bring back into the team, I just need something. And it's bizarre because we get a tiny bit of this with Fred.
I thought what Angel tried to do to you was wrong. And I'm sorry. But he was right to blame you, Wesley. He should have come to us. You should have trusted us instead of going to Holtz behind our back. You were supposed to be our friend, and you didn't even...
Yes, exactly. Give me this conversation. Actually unpack it. Let me hear both sides come out. Make it messy. Make it emotional. Let me hear them yell. And there were other opportunities too. Wes and Teen Connor share an entire season, and at no point do we explore the potential dynamics here. Which would be especially interesting because we know that Wes has a difficult relationship with his own father. Does Wes feel guilty seeing Connor's mental state, knowing his part in it? Does Connor know what happened? Does he feel any resentment toward Wes? These are juicy, juicy character opportunities that are just not touched on at all. What makes it both better and worse is that to some degree the writing acknowledges this gap. In Awakening, there's a scene that breaks my heart, where in Angel's fantasy of his perfect day, it's not even that Wes apologizes. It's just that Wes wants to apologize.
Just the first time I ever heard you apologize about anything.
All Angel wants is the bare minimum from his friend, and he's willing to forgive him for what's honestly a hugely intimate betrayal. And it never happens. And as a result, I just don't know what to feel for a character that at one point felt like my friend too. Which again, just isn't fun. Because A, he gets a bunch of screen time, and B, I want to be able to empathize with him. But the text continues to frame him like a victim for experiencing consequences to his actions, all the while writing him as unwilling and uninterested in even acknowledging his impact on others or repairing trust with the people he hurt. This isn't morally ambiguous, complex writing. It's just frustrating. Again, it's not the choices he makes that I have an issue with. Those are consistent with Wes's character. It's consistent with Wes's character to make unilateral choices that end up having consequences. That's a good through line. It's the underlying flaws at the heart of those choices that are never really interrogated in an interesting way, and in a way that would lead to character growth. There was a way to do this keeping Wes gray and likable, or gray and compelling. What's profoundly less interesting and exhausting is writing a character that makes the same mistakes over and over and apparently doesn't learn from them.
I'll see everyone tomorrow.
I thought you were safer not knowing.
We were safer?
So that's why I tend to be a little resistant to the claims that Wes has this incredible development, because he continues to repeat the same mistakes while having less and less self-awareness and less accountability in the writing. There seems to be so much more emphasis on how different Wes looks and how different Wes acts than actually addressing and challenging these character flaws and beliefs. So while Wes definitely changes, especially outwardly, I wouldn't call that development. And this is especially frustrating in the context of a show whose thesis is,
And all that matters is what we do.
Angel is an introspective show. It's a show about understanding your actions and the beliefs they come from and their impact on the world. On a macro scale, like an ex-murderer, but also on a micro scale, like a former mean girl. It's about characters who weren't willing or capable of reflecting on and changing their behaviors, taking increased responsibility for who they are and what they do. So especially in this context, it's frustrating to have a character whose flaws are there and consistent that the writing hesitates to challenge, especially when he's written as a protagonist to sympathize with. Which leads me to the second plotline, which highlights my other frustration, which is that elevating Wes's emotional arc often comes at the expense of other characters, in particular Fred and Gunn. Because, regrettably, there's the love triangle. This is infuriating for a number of reasons, and I'm not sure anybody really likes it. With all love, Angel the series in general is not the best at writing romances. They just often feel stilted or poorly paced, or like they have to happen rather than following the flow of a character. Ironically, the most compelling relationships in the show, for me, are the A, overtly toxic ones, and B, the one the writing could not more obviously not give a shit about. But this starts Wes's other arc, his tragic love story, which really kicks into gear at the height of his unlikability. Love triangles are already not super fun to watch as is, and in this one, the writing so heavy-handedly favors Wes from the very beginning. And by the end of it, Gunn is framed as the angry black man and Fred as a prize.
You just take what you want,
Come
huh?
on.
Don't matter who it belongs to.
I didn't realize Fred came with a D.
It's just not great. Even Fred and Gunn's first kiss is framed by how bad it makes Wes feel. It's a beautiful moment, but I hate how it's punctuated like that. And this never goes away. Fred and Gunn's moments are so frequently portrayed in relation to how Wes feels about it, which cheapens what is otherwise a sincere and sweet relationship.
I'm sorry, it's just... My God, you're so pretty.
If I'm supposed to be getting invested in Wes Fred this whole time and feeling pity for him because he lost her, it's not working. It feels like we're meant to understand that Wes and Fred are meant for each other somehow, making their delayed and brief time as a couple hit hard or something, but it just never comes across that way to me. It's almost always from Wes's perspective, and there's always this taste of possessiveness and condescension.
She could get hurt. I trust that won't happen.
What are you, her brother?
Apparently.
You've been keeping track of me.
Yes.
Because building up this tragic love for Wes does so at the expense of infantilizing Fred
It's just important to me that she's taken care of.
and offensive and often racist writing towards Gunn.
By the end of the first semester, she was taking on whims.
You should see her now. Killer left hook.
There's the particularly egregious stuff in Supersymmetry in which the writing tips its hand to say, silly goose, Fred, Wes has been the right one for you this whole time. Because, you know, Wes and Fred both like science, even though they study completely different kinds.
I read your article, saw you be speaking. It was an excellent piece. Although I'm not sure I understand how poorly repulsion is so readily reversed. Layman's opinion.
The main case they seem to be making for Wes and Fred being soulmates is that they're both nerds. Clearly an homage to the Alvin and the Chipmunks approach to romance. And of course, don't forget, because Gunn doesn't get all that science stuff, you know, because he's just the muscle.
All this stuff about particles and stuff.
If I hadn't been sucked through that portal, I never would have figured out my string compactification theory.
Exactly, because, you know, strings need to compactify.
Poorly repulsion is so readily reversed. Particles and stuff.
Am I in hell?
Like, who wrote this? And it feels like all of this is meant to be this extra punch when Wes is at his lowest. Like, not only has he lost his family, he's lost the girl he loves. It feels like the writing wants me to be invested, or at least torn, about this whole situation. But I'm just not. Because between the entitled lines and the writing's heavy favoritism, it just leaves a bad taste. And don't get me started on how weird Fred and Gunn's breakup is in this context. It feels so engineered. They break up, then Fred comes forward to try to fix things, they kiss, there's this moment where we're meant to understand that they know it's over, and then it's just done.
Did Jet just die? You know, it was really unclear.
And they never talk about it ever again. And I get that, yeah, in real life sometimes stuff changes and there's no big conversation about it. But this is a television show. Make it make a little sense. This stuff isn't Wes's fault per se, but it's an arc that is A, written strangely, and B, devalues Gunn to make Wes look noble. There's that especially uncomfortable beat where Wes and Gunn start fighting because Wes kissed Fred in a really weird scene.
Which is very sweet. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yes, there is.
And they pull one of the worst tropes where Gunn accidentally hits her and she gives him this horrified face as though he could never have done something so violent. Just a very, very weird vibe. So this is the context around which Wesley's crush on Fred gets more and more focus, and it just gives the entire storyline and the emotions that it's going for have this sour taste that pervades through seasons 3 through 5. And it's so frustrating because they didn't have to give Wes these lines.
What are you, her brother?
Apparently. Face it, Gunn, you can't give her what she needs. Leave them on.
That's so sweet and a tad condescending.
And on top of that, we don't get a fraction of the time dedicated to Fred's side of all this, how she feels about Wes and why. She just kind of does what the story wants her to do. In season 5, Fred and Gunn have essentially zero meaningful interactions after they've broken up, even though they were a couple for a long time and they were friends. And this is all punctuated by how Fred's death revolves so heavily around Wes alone, as though he's the one who lost her, rather than acknowledge her relationships with anyone else, or, God forbid, give her agency. So it feels like this tragic love story was written for Wes at the expense of everything and everyone else, including the woman in the love story. So now we have not one, but two significant, intertwined emotional arcs for Wes that are, to me, missing significant connective tissue and extremely frustrating.
The boulder feels conflicted.
And all this, of course, contrasts with me loving the show, loving the universe, and loving pieces of Wes's story and wanting better for him. He's a character in a universe I love. Of course I want better for him. Because I love Wes in seasons 1 and 2. He's a great balance to the team when he's not being given off-putting sexist lines to Cordy.
I was top 10% of my class.
What class? Advanced bosoms?
Good lord.
His friendships with Angel and later Gunn are really believable and unique and endearing.
Or rather hip to shoulder these days.
This man took a bullet for me.
I was nothing.
And it's so engaging to watch his layers come out as he gains confidence. And I understand, trust me, the appeal of good guy turned dark and scorned. In all fairness, here are some of my favorite Wes moments.
Nice moves up there.
Kiss me.
Bite me.
Angel, it wasn't for her.
I know.
Answer the detective.
Then I'd actually have to have some friends. I don't.
That's not true.
You don't count.
We know you're a man with a demon inside, not the other way around. You're unique. You're like one of these rare volumes.
You suffered enough.
I want you to find some peace.
And there is one emotional arc of Wes's that I actually really, really love, and that's him with Lila. It's so compelling! The scene where he tries to burn her contract.
But it means something that you tried.
It gets me. And this is the kind of dark, mutually manipulative, yet somehow sincere relationship that I just find so intriguing, because the writing just embraces it for what it is. Like I said, my favorite relationships in Angel may be the horrible ones, but that's for another video. If you like Wes, I'm not trying to convince you that you're wrong for liking him, or that his story is completely without narrative or emotional value. I see the things you like, I promise. There are just so many other things that get in the way of me being able to capital L love this character. If they removed the weird and offensive parts of the love triangle, and if they had Wes show a little more sympathy and self-awareness, I would feel really differently. Writing all of this has been cathartic, and as for perceiving it, I can only hope it was either A, equally cathartic, or at the very least, B, entertaining. I've wanted to express it for a while, because it's just this odd phenomenon wherein a certain character's story is so beloved, and I feel like the odd one out because it just doesn't work for me. And you know, blah blah, something about, yes, that's the nature of stories, we all connect / resonate / vibe with different things. Ultimately, my critiques of anything, and this goes 11-fold for the Buffyverse, are out of love for what I know this universe can be at its most excellent. I've got high expectations. I've joked that this is my first hater video, which it's not, but it's always a little step out of my comfort zone to talk about the things that I don't like rather than the stuff I do like. I tend to just enjoy talking about my favorite things a little bit more, and there's always the fear that I'm going to upset someone. But I think it's an important and necessary thing for me to be able to share all kinds of opinions that I have, including critiques of my favorite stuff. So, thank you for following along, and as always, huge shout out to my patrons over on Patreon, without whom these videos would not be possible. If you want to join and support me as a creator, check it out. You can see all kinds of bonus content, see videos early, and get to hang out with me and ask me questions. See you at the next one.